Hello and welcome to Korean Politics Debrief with me, Kwon Jang-woo. Now, this is the first podcast since the 21st presidential election, which was won comfortably by Lee Jae Myung. Comfortably is the key word there, because while he did win by an 8 percentage point margin, it wasn't considered a landslide. Now, of course, in most normal circumstances, it would be considered a landslide, but it's because the margin of victory wasn't as great as many had expected. So Lee Jae Myung of the Democratic Party got 49.42% of the vote, just under 50%, but it was the second highest vote share in modern Korean democratic history after former President Park Geun-hye. Kim Moon-soo of the People Power Party got 41.15% of the vote, just over 40%, which is better than what the pre-election polling had suggested. And Lee Jun-suk of the Reform Party got 8.34%, so he did end up falling just short of the 10% mark, which also means that his party didn't get reimbursed for any of the election expenses. In Korea, if you get more than 10% of the vote, you get reimbursed 50%, and if you get over 15%, you get 100% reimbursement. But yes, he fell short of that 10% mark. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down with the election result, especially because it has been almost 3 weeks now, and there's a lot that's happened since then. And the country really has moved on remarkably quickly, I would say. It does always surprise me about how quickly Koreans move on. We saw that with President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment as well. But yes, the country has moved on. Plus, we do cover it a lot more in our interview today. And yes, this week we do have an interview as well, so that's something to look forward to. But before we get to that, if I do just give my quick thoughts on the election first. Firstly, the result was widely expected, and it was just a relief to get it over and done with. No more nasty surprises, just a feeling of order restored, I think we can say. Finally putting the Yoon Suk-yeol presidency and all the acrimony and tumult and martial law and impeachment behind us. Now, I have said this on the pod before, but martial law and what President Yoon did, it feels like a blip, an aberration in Korean history and politics, considering the narrative of where the country was and where it was going. It just seemed to come out of nowhere and didn't make much sense. And looking back, much of Yoon's presidency feels like that now. So many strange choices he made. He upended so many traditions and the things we took for granted. And already we're seeing a snapback on many of those things, which perhaps I'll try to get to a bit later. But anyway, that's what this election was primarily about: saying no to martial law and putting the nation back on track. And I also think, in a weird way, that's why the margin of victory wasn't as high for Lee Jae Myung as many might have expected. Sure, while for most people this was simply about rejecting the PPP and the party of martial law, making a statement against what President Yoon did. For the people who voted against E, they were already over it. They were already over the martial law. This election wasn't about martial law or what had come before for them. It was all about trying to stop E, or at least sending a message, voicing their opposition to E. So I don't think we should simply see that 41% support for Kim Moon-soo as people who supported Yoon Suk-yeol and martial law. Rather, they voted for Kim despite Yoon and martial law, because they still didn't trust Lee Jae Myung. Sure, there are people, of course, still supporting Yoon and what he did, but in the most part, I think we can't put them all under the same umbrella. It was a mixed bag of people who voted against Lee Jae Myung, and that is important going forward as well, I think. And one final word for Lee Jae-myung. He fell short of the 10% mark, as I said earlier. And while it's hard to say exactly how much impact it had, it does seem that he really shot himself in the foot with that final third debate performance. I said before the election that he would need more than 10% of the vote to be seriously considered as the future of Korean conservatism. And as it turns out, people aren't convinced. Not yet, anyway. So we'll talk more about the election result with our guest in just a moment. But before that, I do want to add in a quick word on the start of the Lee Jae Myung administration as well. He's really hit the ground running. Of course, there was no transition period, so he had to. But still, it's been a whirlwind few weeks. He's made his first cabinet picks. He's drawn up a supplementary budget promising universal cash handouts, essentially, to everyone. He went to the G7 and met a bunch of world leaders, including the Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, but of course not the US President Donald Trump, who left early for whatever reason. The DP have launched 3 special prosecutor investigations looking into President Yoon's martial law, allegations surrounding his wife, Kyunghee, and the alleged mishandling of the incident involving the death of a Marine corporal in 2023. Meanwhile, the courts have essentially decided that they won't be proceeding with the various trials involving President Lee while he's in office, clearing up the question mark that had been hanging over the election. They're essentially respecting the spirit of Article 84 of the Constitution, which gives a president immunity from being indicted while in office, but didn't specifically state what happens when a president is indicted before he's elected. But the courts are now saying, let's let E get on with being president. He's also seriously drawing up plans to move back to Cheongwade, the former presidential office building, aka the Blue House. Now that would really put things back to where things were before Yoon Suk-yeol, and that would be quite a statement as well. The one major hiccup there's been so far is the nomination of Kim Min-seok as his prime minister. He's facing various allegations about his suspicious finances, about where his recent relative wealth has come from. It also doesn't help that he was previously convicted of receiving illegal political funds in the past, but there remains much about his finances presently that doesn't quite add up, to say the least. There are also allegations of nepotism concerning his son, that he got an online internship at a university in Hong Kong, that a legislative proposal drafted by his son during a high school extracurricular activity actually becoming a bill. Now, all this about nepotism is something that's very sensitive in Korea when so many young people are struggling to get into the best schools and find the best jobs. Similar sorts of issues, of course, brought down the former Justice Minister Cho Guk under the Moon administration. All this involving Kim's nomination, it's still playing out, and we'll see if he does make it to PM. It's a scandal for sure, but it's borderline at the moment, 50-50 of whether people think he should resign or not. But it is proving to be a bit of a weight on these early days of the E administration, the biggest hiccup so far, as I said. Now, I could go on about more things that have happened since E came into power, but for me, it's also the little things that shows just how much things have gotten back to normal and how far off the deep end the Yoon administration had gone. After E's simple inauguration ceremony at the National Assembly, he took photos with the cleaning staff, a group of ajumas. It was a simple act, but smart PR, and something we really couldn't have imagined with Yoon, especially in the latter years. Lee Jae Myung, he's been speaking more with the press without causing major, massive headlines as well. For example, on the way to the G7, he spoke to reporters on the plane, on the record, something which Yoon notably refused to do. Then at the G7, he actively spoke with the other world leaders, building up a rapport. Footage of Emmanuel Macron giving him a wink and a thumbs up went viral as well. Meanwhile, he's also been actively making effort to meet with the opposition leaders, something which Yun again refused to do when Yi was the opposition leader. Sure, it's still early days and we are in the honeymoon period, and we'll have to see how these things hold up when pressure builds on the administration moving forward, because there will inevitably be controversies, especially if the E administration and the DP are going to continue to railroad through laws and policies using their majority in the National Assembly. But so far, things have gone fairly smoothly. Even the stock markets have rallied to a 3.5-year high as well. Okay, so let's get to our interview now. And this week we have a guest who is a regular on Career 24, the show I host on KBS World, Professor Se-ryung. He's a regular political and legal commentator on Arirang and other English language outlets in Korea. He's a professor of law at Kyunghee University in Seoul, but he also studied at the Boston College of Law and the Harvard Kennedy School. I wanted to talk to him about two things. First, his reaction to the election, of course, and Lee Jae Myung's start as president. And second, I wanted to ask him about the future of conservatism in Korea, which is facing a crisis after this recent election. It ended up being quite a long conversation, so I've decided to split it up into two podcasts. Next time, we'll talk about the future of Korean conservative politics, but for this podcast today, we'll talk about the election and Lee Jae Myung. This interview was recorded on the 16th of June. Here it is. Okay, so I'm delighted to say that we have with us here Law Professor Se-ryun from Kyunghee University. Professor Song, hello, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
Okay, so can you briefly introduce yourself in your own words for our listeners?
Well, as you said, I'm a law professor, but to get here, I had a lot of interest. I started out as a physics major, went to law, and then after law school, I went to LA. Wherever I go, some kind of troubles happen. I was a LA riot there, Northridge earthquake, and I was a community activist in LA. That led me to go to actually the public policy school, Harvard Kennedy School. And I met some people that you might recognize. The soon-to-be Prime Minister Kim Min-seok was there when I was there.
Right, okay.
And the Assemblyman Park Soo-young was there. Former Minister Lee Chang-yang was there.
So were you with them there at the same time?
Yeah,
so
same time.
Do you know like Kim Min-seok, the soon-to-be Prime Minister, possibly?
Oh yeah. Not frequent contacts, we weren't friends like that, but actually his wife introduced, she was a broadcaster before, so there was a setup. I was single then.
So you met your possibly wife then, you're saying?
Well, she didn't become my wife.
Okay.
It was a long time ago. I got married a long time after that, but to point out that we had that kind of, taking care of each other and looking after each other kind of dynamics.
I hope your wife isn't watching this. I'm not sure if she's okay.
Yeah, that's right. Nothing came out of it.
Right,
anyway, and then I came back to Korea, and then trouble followed because IMF crisis.
Right.
And that happened. I was a management consultant back then, and had a couple of businesses that didn't pan out that well. Became academics, and here I am talking about Korean politics. I always say because I went through business and law and all those things, the only place left is the entertainment field. But whenever I come to media, we always talk about serious stuff.
Right. Okay, so you came to law in a roundabout way, and you've been also become a bit of a familiar face, I think, to a lot of career watchers, English-speaking career watchers, because you've made a lot of media appearances discussing domestic politics and domestic affairs. I've spoken to you many times over the years through KBS and Arirang.
Right.
I believe you even hosted your own show on Arirang TV for a while.
Oh, yeah, it was one of the kind of hosts. There were three hosts for the same program.
Right, well, we often turn to you because of your insights and your eloquence in speaking about all of these matters. But I'm saying all this because you've been quite an observer and commentator of Korean politics over the years, especially since you have these personal connections, it seems, as well, to some politicians. So then, what do you make of Korean politics? How would you describe Korean politics to a Western audience? How do you feel when you talk about Korean politics as well?
Well, as with other things in Korea, like economy, we have grown a lot, and a lot of changes happened in politics. I think that Korean politics is like a drama.
Like a K-drama, you're saying?
Not as good as K-drama. I think the Korean politics is badly written, but it is never boring. Jokes aside, I think Korean politics is pretty resilient, even with its weaknesses. I mean, when we talk about politics, we have to kind of look into what components we're talking about. And first off, there are institutions, political institutions. Are they sound and good? I think in that regard, Korea has made a lot of good strides. In my lifetime, I remember under the authoritarian regime, institutions were subservient to one power. But look at us now. We have a pretty good institutional arrangements. Pretty good, not perfect. And then there's a political culture. The high voting rates, as you can see, everybody's so passionate about either ideology or the localities that they belong to. So that's a good sign. But of course, that breeds unnecessary conflicts, and that translates into kind of a unnecessary political drama that we don't really need. So there's some fatigue factor when you watch the Korean politics as a drama. It's all drawn out, and also
It's too tribal. Are you saying at the moment, you think?
Yes, tribal and also trivial a lot of times. There's a lot of mudslinging. And I think that a lot has to do with the party system that has, went through its own life cycle. And if you look at the Korea, how divergent interests and different kinds of powers are represented in many different forms, we need to have more than one party or a two-party system. And if we have a two-party system, we need to have many different factions in them, not just to divide themselves, but to represent many different interests that Korean people now need to have. So voice-wise, I think that that has been kind of a problem. I think all has to do with, even with the robust strides that the Korean politics has made, we usually often talk about we're under 1987 system. The Constitution was amended then, and that was a reaction from a kind of a authoritarian kind of bad memories that we had. So we shortened the term of the president, but at the same time, we have imperial presidents kind of dynamics. So I think with the robust nature of Korean politics, it needs reform badly at this point. And I'd like to add that with those reforms, we really need a generational change. I think that a lot of people think that the politicians that we see, the wrinkles that they have, and the languages, the logic, and their kinds of ways of going about things, it's just too 20th century. I think that as anything in our society, we see the business sector, they're young, academics, of course, and entertainment, yeah. We see young people making changes, and that kind of dynamic passion and activities are what Korea is these days. Don't get me wrong, these politicians that we have, old politicians, they were the heroes of the past. They were the industrialization in Korea. They've done it. Democratization of Korea, they've done it. But I think it's time that they'll say, hey, we've done what we can do, and we have to kind of pass the baton. And that I think it's what we really need. Because they're not doing a good job, what we see is a lot of street protests.
Right.
Because of the dissatisfaction that we have.
I mean, so I'm guessing you're saying on one hand, you're proud of how far Korea has come, the systems that it has laid out. I'm guessing especially even with what happened with Yoon Suk-yeol and martial law and impeachment, even though he imposed martial law, albeit just for a few hours, there was a system in place where they were able to vote it down, and the democratic system in Korea was strong enough that it could push back. So that is something I'm guessing, we can be proud of. But at the same time, you're saying we need reforms.
Right.
But how realistic is such reforms, do you think? Are such reforms? Because you're essentially asking to rip up the system and a little bit and put the pieces back together again. Whereas the people in power at the moment, they're not going to want to do that. Minjudang, the Democratic Party, Lee Jae Myung, I'm sure he wants to be more progressive and show that he's more progressive, but then he has to take care of all the lawmakers that got him where he is as well, right?
Mm-hmm. I get your point. A couple of things. One, when Yoon Suk-yeol declared the martial law, I think a lot of people had similar reactions. What the, and that came from this thinking that in Korea, now, 21st century, it was so out of place and so anachronistic. And it was, I think, a big lesson for the voters. I mean, Yoon Suk-yeol coming in from the prosecutor's office, not having much experience in governing and politics, he was, as I call it, accidental president. He was not prepared. I think a lot of people voted for him just because they didn't want, the other guy, Lee Jae Myung, who did become the president this time around.
Right.
So that kind of dynamics is indicative that the Korea, a lot of people share the same consensus that Korea needs to change. And another thing is we notice that the voting, whether it be passion or just participation for the young people has gone up. And the young politicians we begin to see, and I think that people are looking towards the future where those reforms, maybe the current politicians are not motivated to do and cannot do capacity-wise. Let's face it, a lot of politicians became a politician and in this power by throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails in their younger days. Their passion was rewarded, but we have a different era. We need to pay attention to the details. We have to be very strategic about a lot of matters. It's not just one swoop reform that will change Korea. I mean, a lot of things are already in place. We need to jig it. We need to fix it in small details. We have to be very strategic about how to make changes happen in small steps. So attention to details, that's the thing.
So you think that's going to come from the younger generation?
It should come from the younger generation rather than the older generation who tend to forget a lot of things.
Do you think they'll be able to break through? Because, again, as you were saying, Korean politics is so guarded by the old guard. Even someone like Lee Jae Myung, who's been around for years, who's now in his 40s, who ran for president, he's still considered, quote unquote, a kid, a child in a lot of the older politicians' eyes in Korea. They were saying he was a, what does this child know?
Well, a kid who garnered over 8%. I mean, towards the end, the Korean voters always gravitate towards one or two parties. So third party, the candidates in Korea, it's hard to survive. But I think it is somewhat impressive that he made name for himself as a presidential candidate. He played a part, and not a lot of people expected that he will become a president, but he just turned 40. So I think that people are kind of seeing the indication that Lee Jae Myung or others in the younger generation will bring up. We brought up to the fore and make contributions. I think that it's, if you look at it optimistically, it's an exciting time that we were seeing the change of guards or the beginning part of it. And of course, the old politicians will, fight tooth and nails to block their path or keep what they have, but they're getting old. I mean, that's how the changes happen in a lot of the different ways.
Okay, so I'm guessing we just need to wait a few more years to see this new generation potentially rise. At the moment, I think it's still quite hard to see even politicians who are in the spotlight in their 40s even at the moment still. But perhaps give it time. You're saying from what you've seen, young people do look politically engaged.
Well, I think it's a kind of a hopeful scenario, and maybe I'm projecting my wish towards the analysis too much, but I think it's a necessity at this point. Politics, which made a lot of differences in Korea in the past, has become kind of a roadblock for many different fields. So in that sense, I think the people will share the opinion that in order for Korea to kind of break through this doldrum economically, politically, socially, I think we need the change in a big way, not the big reforms, but those people who are running it in the political sector. I think we need to see fresh faces, fresh ideas, and fresh passion.
Well, there's a lot more I want to try and cover with you today, so let's get into them now. The first is the fact that this is the first podcast since the election that I'm doing. If we just go over the results, the Democratic Party's Lee Jae Myung won the election with 49% of the vote, while the People Power Party's Kim Moon-soo was 8 points behind with 41%. And 49% for Lee Jae Myung, that was the second highest vote share in modern Korean democratic history after Park Geun-hye. So first, I wanted to get your reaction to the election result. What were your takeaways from Lee's election win?
Well, he's the president. I don't believe that there was any foul play in the voting in modern years. So he is the president, legitimate. And the number that you cited, 49.42, it is a very respectable, a very good number. It's close to 50%. So in terms of legitimacy, he's got it. But at the same time, he was the guy who lost the last time. And in the last presidential election, if you remember, it was a choice between the evil and someone who is even worse than that.
The lesser
right?
of two evil. Yeah.
Right. It
sure.
was not a beauty contest in a positive way. And even with a kind of decimated party and not a, in my assessment, not a very attractive the candidate. On the other side, the fact that he didn't get over 50%, it says something. He he does have a chip on his shoulder. And
Yeah, why do you think he wasn't able to get more of the vote share, considering, as you said, everything that went on with Yoon Suk-yeol and martial law and the impeachment?
Well, I think that there are a sizable number of people who still think that he very hesitant to vote for him, even with the very bad situation on the other side. So there should be a message from the voters that, yeah, you're the president, but we have some doubts. So you better work on, shedding our doubts.
Do you think anyone else would have done better than Lee Jae Myung if they had run this election?
Anyone
If
else in the
just-
Minju Party?
In the Minju Party, in the DP, if they'd even put up someone, a no-name, that because of all the baggage that comes with Lee Jae Myung, that the people would have voted more overwhelmingly for someone else.
I think if you put up, broomstick, I think you would have won. This is the election where the Conservative Party just shot themselves in the face. So this was widely expected that the other side would win, and a lot of people thought that was the right thing to do because of those kind of bad moves that multiple of them made by the Conservative Party. So it was not a question of whether he will win, but how much margin that he will garner. And not getting over 50%, it's an indication that the voters are sending a pretty clear message to Lee Jae Myung.
Right. The message I'm guessing is, we're giving you a chance, but you got to do well.
We're giving you a chance because we have no choice, but you better rise up to it.
So do you have concerns about Lee Jae Myung as a president?
Well, yes and no. No, we'll start that. He does have some governing experience, right, as a mayor and as a governor of a province. And the kind of anecdotes we see here is that he's very detail-oriented, right, micromanager even. And going back to what I was saying, in Korea, we need the devil in the details, and those kind of detail-oriented thinking is something that we need at this point. But the concern is that he didn't win on a policy platform or the kinds of mix of policies that will project the vision for Korea in the future. I, along with other people, still think that he's a populist. He would say anything to garner votes. But that concern is a little bit less because, this is a dangerous statement, because he doesn't have to fight as much, right? When he was the party representative of the opposition party, his survival instinct is very strong. It's remarkable at times. I mean, his whole life path is about difficulties, but he has overcome in a way. But how he overcome, a lot of people had some concerns in their characters.
The New York Times said if there's one word to describe Lee Jae Myung, if anything, it's that he's a fighter.
He's a fighter. It is something that is, in some level, it's a lesson to a lot of people now. You're born in a family with not much resources, but you can rise to the presidency in Korea. So it's sort of a kind of proverbial ladder that still exists. So it's good. But at this point, his political career has a lot of baggages, legal troubles, and people have still doubts whether that kind of bad side of him, something they acquired just to become a very effective fighter, would come out.
I guess some people would say that it's a good thing that he wasn't too policy heavy because it leaves wiggle room for him to do whatever is needed to help improve the country. That he's a pragmatist. That's a word that a lot of people have used, that he's not a populist, but a pragmatist. But I'm guessing then the other side of the argument would be, because he doesn't stand for anything, we don't know what we're going to get. And that scares a lot of people as well, I think.
Yeah, but to an extent, I think we need to be able to look at the politician, say, hey, what does he or she stand for? On a conservative side, on a liberal side, we need both. So we need to kind of be able to pin him in certain directions so that we'll have some predictable activities he would do or policies they come up with. We don't want surprises at this point. Bad surprises, that's not good. But going back to...
But is he someone who you think will bring bad surprises? We've seen essentially the worst of the worst when it comes to someone who brings bad surprises. He is someone who, of course, he's going to try to push the agenda, but he's not going to be someone who crosses the line, right? He's not going to be someone who's going to... The conservative right, so the extreme right, they're saying he's going to sell off the nation to China. He's a Chinese agent, that's what they're saying, and that kind of stuff. But he's not going to ruin the country.
I don't believe any of that. But did we say similar things about Yoon Suk-yeol when he came in? Because he didn't have much experience, he would be different to the technocrats and those people who have experiences, so it's going to be okay. I mean, by the way, one good thing about Korean politics is that we have a pretty good, capable civil servants, technocrats. So the rule of thumb is that if you don't know how to govern, then utilize whatever has built up in Korean civil servant system and technocrats. We expected Yoon Suk-yeol to do that to compensate for his lack of experience, but he went the other way, and that was a problem. For Lee Jae Myung, I think that his lack of policies at this point, wiggle room, you said, but at the same time, if he is wrapped with some ideologies that was pushed by the liberal faction, which became a source of trouble under the Moon Jae-in government, notably, tinkering with the market-based system, trying to change too much at a short period of time. Those things, if that happens under Lee Jae Myung, I think we will see similar troublesome spots and concerns as we did under Moon Jae-in. And his basic income ideas, helicopter money ideas, and his kind of simplistic way of understanding the economy, that still has some, give some question mark to people. The advice would be, to surround yourself with the good, sound economists and the policymakers, so that you don't, fall into those kind of traps.
With Moon Jae-in, you're talking about things like, I'm guessing, the 42-hour work week, maybe real estate policies, things like that, you're saying?
Yeah, generally, this is my bias, but the liberals and progressives, they have some noble ideas. But a lot of times it's not realistic, right? But it is needed, because if you put the noble ideas in, maybe a little bit utopian, maybe something that goes too much against the markets that we have, but if you kind of get those ideas and apply to a realistic, detail-oriented policies, it can be good. So tit-for-tat kind of dynamics can come up with a pretty good idea that can move the society forward. But if you just have a kind of, pie in the cloud kind of ideas without having a clear vision and the strategy to put that to use, that's when problem happens. They'll say, my intentions are good, it just didn't work. That is not a good excuse for somebody who runs the country.
So at the time of recording today, it's been less than 2 weeks since he took office. Very early days, but how would you assess what he's done so far during this time? What do you read into his first few moves? It's been a busy few days.
Well, from me, he gets a benefit of doubt. Too early. He didn't have a transition team, so he's kind of, running into the fire. So he might make some mistakes. Early days, I wouldn't be too harsh about the early days. I think there were some concerns about how he picks people, and maybe tinkering with the judiciary at this point. Maybe some indication that he might be harsh on the other side, having a special prosecutors and all those. But those are all indications. We don't know whether that would become a problem and too much divisive factor so that his presidency will not be effective.
Okay, so too early to say either way whether he's doing a good job or a bad job, essentially, you're saying.
So far, I think it's okay. There are concerns, but just indications, not something that I would say, well, he's, presidency is off to a bad start. I wouldn't say that.
Okay, so what about his picks so far to be in his cabinet? For example, your friend, the potential prime minister.
Well, the more kind of a shocking, but in a good way, move would have been somebody who's more conservative. Conservative, as in, from that scale. So somebody who would be
leaning a bit more to the right, a bit more moderate.
Yeah, there would have been a good message. But I understand that the prime minister is very close to the president in terms of carrying out the policies. I thought Mr. Kim Min-seok, he switched parties a couple of times, but he always survived with kind of edgy rhetorics and strategies. And he hasn't been somebody who would be very inclusive of the ideas. He might change. We don't know. He went to good school. But at this point, again, benefit of doubt. But I think that might have been a better pick.
I mean, what kind of character is he from what you know of him? I mean,
Mr.
we've
Kim
obviously,
Min-seok?
Mr. Kim Min-seok. We've seen him obviously in the political arena, as you said. He's a bit of a fiery figure, going from different parties, and he's someone who has made headlines. But you've known him for a long time. What's your assessment of him as a character?
Well, he's a survivor, isn't he? Even with the switching of parties, he does put his skills into a good place to become a effective politician. So I think that he has a good potential to be a good prime minister. Whether he would be a figure to unite people, different factions, because we saw he's very effective in going into a fighting mode. So as a prime minister, we haven't had enough evidences to see that he is going to be a very capable steward of all kinds of complex matters in Korea. So a little bit of question mark, but again, I can go back to question mark. He's smart enough. He has good instincts. And if he doesn't have to fight, maybe that good side would be put into making good policies. That's at least our hope.
Come on, no funny stories from when he was a student? No drunken night outs? Anything you can share with us?
No.
I'm kidding. I was hoping to get an exclusive, but never mind. Okay.
I don't want any kind of footages going around.
Fair enough. Okay, let's talk about some of these other legal issues. that surrounds E, and also issues surrounding the judiciary in these first few days of the E administration, because these are issues that are controversial, and they could potentially kind of taint his administration in the early days, I feel, because they are so contentious right now, because we're seeing things happen very quickly. Let's start with things like the move to increase the number of Supreme Court justices. What do you make of that? So the plan is for the DP to increase the number of justices from 14 to 30 over the next 4 years. And the reason for this is because there's a huge backlog of cases that the Supreme Court has to deal with all the time, and to increase diversification of the justices. And the DP has said this is something that needs to be done, but the PPP and the critics of it are saying this is just their way to try and influence more power over the judiciary. It's a controversial topic, but what do you make of it?
Well, because Mr. Lee Jae Myung President Lee Jae Myung had legal troubles, and the rhetorics they were using were made before to say that they don't like what's happening with the judiciary. It just creates bad optics. Rather than saying that, well, we're going to make the judiciary more efficient by giving more personnel, it just looks like a court packing, which happened in many different countries, many different eras, usually not effective, because people see that, well, that is a way of kind of influencing or weakening the institution. If the reform idea should come, I think it should come from the judiciary itself. And whether we, change to kind of certiorari system that the U.S. Supreme Court takes, or we kind of increase the number in a gradual ways, I think that the judges themselves know what will work. Coming from the politicians, president, and the opposition party who condemned the judges and the decisions they came up with, their reform plan just sounds like a court packing plan that is further designed to protect whatever legal troubles they have or will have going forward.
I mean, that's, I'm guessing, the concern, but is that really going to happen from the way they're doing it? I know at the moment they're going to increase the number of justices, and it's going to be over the next 4 years. So it's going to be their pick, not as such their pick, but they're going to set the rules for these justices to be picked. But still, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will pick people who will protect the president, right? Well, I mean, there is, many people would say there is reform needed for the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's a balancing test. We need the reform, but do we need it now? Do we need it the way it is being done? At this point, because the Minju Party has the presidency and the legislature in a very strong grip, they have to behave themselves, not to give the reason to people to turn against them. Because 2 out of 3, the balance of power arrangements are on their side. Tinkering with the judiciary, it's not a bad timing to do it, even with some rationale that the efficiency matter has to be guarded. So in that sense, I think that the way they're going about it at least gives a kind of bad bias or an assumption to people that this is not from a good, honest intentions of just having a good reform. So the one bad move that we'll say, see, that's why you're doing it, right?
I'm going to run through some other issues because there's so much to go through on this side of the issue at the moment concerning Lee's judicial kind of reforms and his legal troubles. So it's almost going to be like a quick fire round. But what do you make of the court's decisions to delay Lee's various trials? So he is facing up to 5 trials before he was elected. There were various stages of progress, but so far, two of the courts in 2 of the trials have said we're going to delay it, citing Article 84 of the Constitution, where the immunity of the president is guaranteed bar insurrection or treason. There was suggestion that this rule, the Article 84 was kind of vague, that it wasn't specific enough, that it didn't guarantee someone who is indicted before becoming president. And so there was a question mark of whether they would continue the trials. But it seems like the courts are deciding, no, look, it's Article 84 covers even people who were indicted before the election. What do you make of that?
Well, that's a position that people can argue about. I always look at the court in a setting where the trial happens. And the judges usually listen to the both sides, and they make decisions as to whether to delay or have some arrangements just for the administration of the trial. So it's not strange that they will give more time to the one side or the other. Also, for the judiciary, the judicial restraint is something that they are mindful of. Right? Don't get involved in the political mudslinging, and the Article 84, controversial as it is, it does have some function where we cannot have a president who goes to the court every other day. So I think the real question is whether he will face the legal issues or resumption of his trials after his presidency is done.
Right.
But during the time he's a president, I think there is a good kind of argument that the president should be concentrated on the nation, not his personal matters. But it's not a blank, check.
Well, then, do you think that law needs to be changed? Do you think there needs to be an amendment to the Constitution to that Article 84, which specifically specifies that this includes, someone who was indicted before the election as well, to get rid of any grey area? Or is the fact that the courts have made the decision precedent enough that we don't need to change it?
I think we don't need to change it. That's my personal opinion. I think it's good enough. But the question is how to administer it. I think that if we want to change it, if we need to change it, I think it has to be the consensus from the people as well, because we're talking about the presidential power and what he can do or cannot do. A similar situation where the presidential pardon, whether that would be a good idea or we should change or restrict it. I think that those kind of things goes to the question of the constitutional arrangement that we have. It has some cracks, and we need the reforms. Not only the length of the time they serve, but kind of powers they have, and when the change is needed and how you change it. I think that those go to the kind of same category of questions in terms of what kind of reforms we should have.
Briefly, what do you say to those who've criticized the court, saying that they're bowing to political pressure?
Well, a good argument. I think there's some reason to it. But again, judicial restraint is not exactly kind of bowing to the power. I think the judiciary has to, keep their ground when it needs to. But they're going up against the president on a political ground. I think it's not good for the country as well. So people will fight about, yes, judicial restraint, but it is to a point where they're just bowing to the present power who occupies the president's office. Well, it's good to argue about it, but I have no grave concerns in that regard.
I guess it would be the smartest thing to do for the DP to not try to reform that specific article in the Constitution until after Lee Jae Myung. Because if the courts have decided now that they're going to delay the case anyway, then I guess there's no rush. And they can say afterwards, this was an issue before, so let's clarify that now. I'm guessing that would be the smart thing to do down the road.
Yeah, simply because
Right.
the constitutional arrangement, if you want to change it, then it has to be a kind of package where we were talking about the different adjustments in the different institutions. But if they're focusing on the judiciary to that intensity, people have doubts.
On that note, there is another law that the DP are looking to change as well, and that's the election law violation case. Now, the trial that had progressed the furthest for Lee Jae Myung was the election law violation case. He was essentially accused of lying during the 2022 election in order to influence the result. It was about whether he knew a suspicious figure who was involved in the land development case or not. So he was initially found guilty, then found not guilty by an appeals court, but then the Supreme Court, they took issue with that ruling and sent it back to the High Court. And the High Court was set to retry this case, but it's now not pursuing it, delaying it indefinitely, probably until he leaves office. The DP are looking to change this specific law as well, I understand. That they say the election law violation case shows that it's too strict when it comes to lying. And that, for example, if we were to have the same standards for other countries, for example, in the US, Donald Trump would be in jail for hundreds of years. And that it restricts presidential candidates too much. What do you make of that?
Again, bad optics. Tinkering with the specific law that put the President Lee Jae Myung in trouble, that looks like, we're going to give him some blank check at this point.
But do they have a point, though, in more broader terms?
Well, it's a balancing test. But for me personally, I think it's better to be strict because we're talking about the politicians who live and die with their words and how to manipulate their words. And we're talking about the political system where the voters, the kinds of information they get, accurate information, and the confidence they have on the politicians, that is a backbone of Korean democracy. So even if it looks like it's strict, if the rules are the same for all the politicians, I think it's better to be strict because politicians are skilled enough to wield it and bend it.
But isn't it very subjective? Because this is about the law essentially judging people's intent, whether they're looking to try and sway public opinion or not by lying. Or it could just be a mistake or just a misworded statement.
Well, the judiciary has no way of with certainty knowing what the intentions are.
That's
right?
why we saw 3 rulings, isn't that why? With the district court, the High Court, and the Supreme Court.
But if you look at it, the trial court and the High Court was saying that regardless of what the intentions were, the impressions they left to the voters is that the voters could be misled, right? So I think that's the good standard, the ordinary person standard. If the ordinary person listens to how it was presented, would they have trouble deciphering into what the intentions were?
Again, the people who argue against that would say that it's up to the people to decide, not the courts. It's up to the people and the press to fact check what candidates are saying and then to see for themselves, to assess for themselves whether that person is judging or not, and therefore vote accordingly with that. It shouldn't be a legal black or white decision.
Well, the trouble with that is a circular logic. Only means that the voters can exercise their power to decide is through voting, but that law itself is to protect whether the voters are getting the accurate information. then you have no winning argument there. I think the arrangement is good where the court is not giving a guilty or not guilty based on what they said and how they hear in the ears of the judges. They're saying that this is the rule. Play by this rule. It's going to be a little bit strict. You have to be careful about what you say because we're going to be on the voter side and strictly guard those kind of manipulations. So the counter argument has always been, politicians should be able to say anything to further their discussions and their debates. Yes, to an extent, that's why I say it's a balancing test. But if the rules are the same, and if they're in front of the camera, and if the voters are watching, then it's not an onerous burden for them to be careful about how they mince the words and how they select the word, how they arrange the words to create impressions.
I guess we'll see whether the Democratic Party do try to push to change this law or not. But as you said, optics, it doesn't look great that they're changing the law to what looks like essentially protect the president. Let's look at one more major issue, and that's the 3 special prosecutor bills that the DP have passed and that Lee Jae Myung has promulgated. So these are 3 bills appointing special prosecutors looking into A, Yoon's martial law attempt, B, various allegations involving his wife, Kyunghee, including stock manipulation, and C, the Yoon administration's handling of a death of a young Marine during a search and rescue operation, allegations essentially of a sort of cover-up of perhaps incompetence or misdeeds that they did. So these laws were all passed by the DP, and they've essentially kicked off the launch. This launches the biggest special prosecutor investigations ever. Something like 500, 600 personnel are going to be involved in these 3 cases. What's your reaction to this?
Well, this is also an optics issue, I think that it looks bad. Of course, to begin with, those issues needs to be investigated, and it has to be thoroughly and very faithfully investigated so that people will have no doubts. But if you look at the situation, the DP party has always pushed for special prosecutors. I mean, if it's crime enough, then we do have a justice system already, and investigation can be done. And a lot of times, special prosecutors, because of the way it is set up, it might have more limitations. I think it's if it was used as a scare tactic, then it has a limited use. But if you make a special prosecution for the investigative issues that needs to be kind of an ordinary routine investigation, then probably they're using it as a political means rather than trying to get to the truth. So in that sense, a lot of people will say that, why do they want to launch prosecutors from a legislative side?
That would be mistrust of the prosecution, wouldn't it? Because they seem to be dragging their heels when Yoon was in power. So the prosecution has this reputation of not being impartial.
Well, I think it's a plausible assumption because the prosecution's office have been subservient to the power at the time. But they're in the power at this point. So attacking the prosecutor's office at this point, I don't know if it's going to be as effective as the kinds of the rhetorics they hurled as an opposition party. I think they should say that, well, we can change things. We need to change it in a very orderly way and in gradual fashion rather than demonize them and try to get rid of them.
Also, what's the track record like when it comes to special prosecution investigations? Do people find special prosecutor investigations satisfying? Do you think people will be convinced that they will be able to provide the answers? And when the answers do come, do you think they will be convinced by them?
I think I forget which one it was, but there was, I think, one maybe, or maybe one and a half special prosecutors who did come up with some demonstrable results. It's usually not effective because of, as I pointed out, it has limitations of resources, limitations of time periods, and usually used as a political kind of a ploy, or the cry of war, rather than saying that with this we're gonna, get rid of all those question marks. So that's why I think the investigations, if it needs to be investigated, usually it has to be investigated by the present system that we have, investigation and the justice system. When they say, special prosecutors, then they're saying that it has some danger that the present power will interfere with it. So we'll discard them in the legislature and protect their investigative activities. But they're in power at this point, so that argument kind of fails.
Okay, so the reason as I said, I want to talk about all of these issues is because that I think a lot of them are what Yi's opponents had warned about in the run-up to the election as well. And while I'm sure Yi will be looking to tackle economic and diplomatic issues with the US and whatnot, it's these legal and judicial issues, I think, where the administration is currently most exposed. That he's open to criticism for potentially looking like they're changing the rules or the laws to protect Yi, and that they're using the judiciary to seek vengeance from their opponents as well by going after the past administration. So with that in mind, the final question on just the Yi administration, what advice would you have to the Yi administration now?
Well, we talked a little bit about Moon Jae-in administration. They launched some big-scale purging the operations, right? I mean, at first it had its rationales. We have to make it a kind of clean sweep. But what ended up doing is that was a kind of a black mark for the Moon Jae-in administration. And that was also a divisive force. And that brought kinds of ill feelings on the other side, and the fightings escalated. Don't make the same mistake. I mean, you got enough power in the legislature and in the presidency, so you don't have to fight as hard and focus. And my advice would be focus on economy and diplomacy. A lot is happening, a lot of bad hurdles are ahead. So I think the people would be happy where the President Lee would not put too much efforts in his ideological or the defensive action in the domestic matter, but focus on the economy and diplomacy at this point, where a lot has to be done.
Okay, so that wraps up part one of my interview with Professor Song. I think what we can sense from that interview is that while there is relief, again, that the martial law crisis is officially over with Yi's election, there is still trepidation about what his presidency will bring. While he's been given the benefit of the doubt, he's being watched closely. Bad optics is the phrase that came up the most when talking about all the judicial and legal issues especially, even if it could be argued that he's justified in pursuing some of these reforms and policies. Many will advise Yi to tread very carefully around these issues. It's going to be fascinating to see how he wields his power. And I think most importantly, it's going to be about what pushes him to wield that power as well. I mean, if he starts to feel any sort of pressure from anywhere, how will he react? How will he use his power? Professor Song is right in that right now, with no enemies and no pressure, it's easy to make the right decisions. But when you're under the cosh, as they say, that is when the real test will be. Okay, so next time we'll have part 2 of the conversation with Professor Song, a little bit more about the uncertain future of the People Power Party and Conservative Party politics in general moving forward, because there really are a lot of challenges ahead for them. Now, before I go, I would like to say one more thing, and that is to announce that I've managed to reach 100 subscribers on YouTube, and about 100 more across podcast platforms as well. It may not be much, but considering how niche my subject matter is and how little I've been doing to promote it, I mean, I really should be doing more to promote it. Still, I'm really proud I've gotten this far, and I really appreciate whoever is tuning in, whether you're tuning in from South Korea or the US, or as far away as Iceland or Brazil. Thank you so much for taking an interest. I will try to do my best to continue to share with you interesting insights and interviews on Korea and Korean politics. And of course, if you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, please message or comment on any of the platforms, or reach out via email at koreanpoliticsdebrief@gmail.com. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you once again for listening, and have a great day. Thank you.